to Live and Uncut. It's Paul Griffiths here, and my guest this evening is from the US. It's Bradley Hanson. Bradley, welcome to my show.
Thanks, Paul.
It's great for you to join me. Extremely busy time that you're going through at the moment. I understand we're just sort of now starting to get into sort of what would term as almost like a close season for you, which is nice to have a break. But just before we start, just want a quick apology that there was no show last week because I was very busy with my my work. And but rest assured, over the next few weeks, I've got a number of really intriguing and interesting guests to join me. No less Bradley with me as well today. Bradley, again, thanks for joining me. I'd like to start my show off, Bradley, with basically finding out what was the first camera that you can recollect in your household when you were a young kid?
The first one that I remember was actually one that ended up being my first camera, which was my parents had brought back this Voigtlander rangefinder from Germany, and you know, I don't know if they had dropped it or what happened, but they let me have it, and I immediately started passing film through it, and it had a very unusual look, like some of the elements were loose, so it almost looked like a tilt shift lens. But I thought it was beautiful, and that's what really got me hooked on photography. Was just that was the first camera that I was aware of, and I think that has a huge part why I'm so attracted to silver cameras.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I had a Voigtlander once. One of the it wasn't the rangefinder camera; it was the one without the viewfinder actually in the camera. You had to buy that as a separate item. I used to love playing with that. But Voigtlander just recently have stopped making cameras. I read recently, so that's a great shame that they've pulled out of the film camera market.
Yeah, well, it was sort of inevitable that
yeah.
they were made by Casino, which is not a bad thing, but they were based on the same chassis as the Nikon FM10, which is something that they make also. And so it's a converted SLR body. So if you want the full rangefinder experience, you know, they had a lot of, I think they were great looking cameras, and they were, you know, I love their lenses, but that camera had a very loud shutter because it was a converted SLR body.
Yeah, that's right. But I remember that, especially with there's a Bessa L, I think, that I had. So moving on, you got involved in photography at what sort of age are we talking about here? This is quite early by the sound of things.
Well, I would say that I got that first camera when I was 10, and I took pictures, and you know, I was really excited by it, but it wasn't really till around 14, 15 where I really, you know, this was all I wanted to do. And I got my first job just sort of the tail end of being 14, and I saved up, and I think a month later I bought my first camera, which was a Minolta X700.
Oh, and it's amazing how many guests that I have on their first camera was the Minolta range. It's amazing.
Yeah, I was really bummed when they went out of business, but that was, it's funny because at that time, you know, everyone was coming out with similar bodies like that. Like Canon had an AE1 program, and Olympus had the OM4, which was a very high-end option. Yeah. I don't remember exactly what Nikon's option was, but
I can't actually remember what that would have been around by that time. You obviously into the FG series.
Oh, FA.
FA, yeah, the FAs. The FG obviously came on from the EMs, and then of course you have the F range, you know, FM2s, FE2s, that sort of work. Used to love. You mentioned just before we started the show about using the FM2 with some infrared film, and one of the best cameras I ever bought was the Nikon FM2. I can't believe I sold it, but I did.
Yeah, I know. I regret it too. And those are really well made cameras.
Superb cameras. And you know, when you think about resaleability and sort of holding on to their value, you know, I was looking on eBay only a couple of days ago. You're looking at something around about $150, $200 easy for a good quality FM2, even these days, which is amazing. But they were built to last, weren't they? They were great cameras.
Yeah, and that's funny too because no one else offered anything like it. No. Minolta, I know Canon didn't. They were all electronic shutters. I think actually Olympus had a few mechanical shutters, but they were rubberized cloth, and no one had that titanium shutter. Yeah, so what they were first to market with was that 2/50th sync speed and the 4,000th shutter.
4,000th a second shutter, exactly right. It's amazing. I couldn't believe it.
It's like nothing now, but you know.
Well, yeah, it's nothing now. You know, if you can easy, no problem with 4,000 a second these days. But back in what would that be? Around about the mid to late 70s, I suppose. 4,000 a second was almost unheard.
Well, the FM2 I think came out in 82, 83.
Was it about 82? Yeah, probably around about that time. Yeah, I'm trying to remember when my first Nikon was the EM. So yeah, probably about 82. Yeah, early 80s. It's great talking about these old cameras. I've still got a few Nikons up there, which I know they're worthless. They're probably about 20, 30 pounds on eBay. So there's no point in selling them. I put a roll of film.
They're better to look at now, so I would keep them.
Yeah, exactly right. Keep them on there. So around about 14 or 15 now. So you're into the latter parts of school. What did you study photography from further on from there? Did you go to college and study photography?
I did eventually, but around age 15, again, like when I was shooting with the Minolta, and then I moved up fairly quickly to the FM2 when I got interested in learning how to use manual focus only. So what's funny is I bought the X700. Sorry, I was thinking X100. X700 specifically because of its program features, but you realize quickly that having things done for you is not the best way to approach photography. So I got the FM2 specifically to learn how to shoot, how to meter in my head, and you're shooting only with a camera that has a plus, a 0, and a minus in the viewfinder, so you have to really understand exposure. So the helpful thing with that was I'd go outside, I'd look, and you knew it instinctively that a sunny day was, with 400 speed film, that you'd be at 4,000th of a second at f2.8 or f4, depending on how bright it was. And that would be a good starting point. And then I would fine tune quickly from there. And that was a very, as far as as far as SLRs got, that was the most rangefinder-esque experience, I think.
Yeah.
Because of the way it worked. It was so simple. And the plus and minus even turned the shutter dial turned the right way, kind of like the M6. But after that point, I was taking pictures for my high school yearbook, for my high school newspaper. And that's how I got my first darkroom experience, developing film, printing, that sort of thing. Have I lost you?
Guess to come back online.
Oh, there we go. You were frozen.
He's back. Yeah, sorry about it. I was waffling away there trying to fill some time. I knew you were going to come back soon. Where were we? Are you there? Yeah.
I was talking about when I was
where you put that little filter in. Is that something which you had?
I'm sorry.
When you had the X700, the Minolta X700, was that the one where you could put the little disc in the side of the camera?
No, I'm not sure. Oh, I think that was the one of their Maxim series where it actually it was a kind of an unusual feature. I had some of those too.
Yeah.
I had I had the original Maxim 7, and then they had a 7 series, which was almost like kind of a semi-pro body.
Yeah.
That had these weird chip system where you could it was just sort of additional ways to automate the camera, and it was sort of not in accord with the kind of thing I was looking for, so I never bought any of those. But I always liked the design of their cameras, and Sony was lucky enough to get the Maxim. A lot of their lenses were based on just rebranded Minolta lenses, and unfortunately I think a lot of that's gone away as they've moved almost exclusively over to Zeiss. But
that's right. It was an interesting move with Minolta, and then obviously Sony taking over the reins of that particular company. But as I said,
Konica was in on that too.
Exactly. Yeah. Konica.
Konica made an amazing camera, a whole bunch of great cameras, but 35 f2 Hexar with the autofocus, and then they had a body that I loved called the Hexar RF, which was sort of a poor man's M7, but it was just as good and really well made, great lenses, you know, very overt attempts at copying Leica, which is always a good career move.
Yeah, exactly right. So let's get back to your school life just for a brief second. From school, you went on to college to study.
I feel like I've lost you again. Paul?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, we keep cutting out, keep losing it. Sorry.
You froze for a moment.
Yeah, and yeah. Oh dear, I think it's going to be one of these shows, so we have to keep an eye on this. No, my question was, what did you study in college?
Oh, okay. Well, you know, so back through high school, I was taking pictures for my high school paper, my high school yearbook. That was my first darkroom printing and developing experience. And then I originally went to college as a journalism major, but that wasn't really where my heart was. And so when I was able to go to a school called the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where they, you know, sort of require you to take sculpture and graphic design and, you know, various visual arts. And I took several photography classes, and that was helpful in a number of ways because I think all of those visual arts have overlap. No matter what we're doing, we're still dealing with composition, whether it's physical or on a page or in a frame or, you know, in a viewfinder. And that was, again, additional printing experience. So every Saturday I would go in the morning and I would come out, you know, late at night, and it was dark, and I was, you know, sad to miss the daylight, but happy because there was nothing I loved better than printing from negatives.
And getting into the darkroom, yeah, those were the days. Again, we're having the right trip down memory lane almost here. So when did wedding photography sort of kick in as a mainstay of your business?
Well, I had by 97, I had moved to Seattle. And I had I'd been doing portraits, and I was doing portraits in addition to a corporate job that I was doing, you know, servicing computers, which was, again, something I had an aptitude for, but no passion for. So when I was doing portraits on the side, I randomly did a wedding based on someone who loved my portraits. I think it was April of 1999. And, you know, I literally had no idea what I was doing. And that ended up being kind of an asset because I didn't have to unlearn, you know, strict formal training. I'd never assisted anybody. I'd really only been to probably 2 or 3 weddings in my life at that point and had no idea what people, you know, were looking for. And so I sort of, in my mind, I kind of selfishly shot, well, I'm just going to photograph the kind of things that I would want to see. And that ended up working really well. So my first wedding went really well, and then it took off from there.
It's interesting you make the comment there, because the style of your photography, which we're going to take a look at very shortly, I get the impression that this documentary style of weddings is becoming quite popular now. Gone are the days where it's the we must have the group shot, we must have the bride and groom, we must have the bride and groom with the best man and the bridesmaids. Those standard shots. I understand that probably you are requested to do those as you know, as part of an album that you would sell on. But this documentary style is, I'm getting the impression, is getting quite popular now in the wedding photography world.
Right. Well, yeah. So just as I was getting into, I'll try to tell one story at a time here, but just as I was getting into weddings was kind of, I think the late 90s, you know, I felt like that was this kind of the start of that transition toward a more natural style. And once those doors sort of opened up, there was no going back, because I think that sort of stiff style of everything kind of being shot off of a standard template was not of interest to brides anymore. And the best thing for me was that just part of the way that I work and the way I've continued to work since then is to be as invisible as possible to get the bride used to me. And I start with, usually in that process, photographing the bride and groom getting ready, and the emphasis is much heavier on the bride. But once they get used to being photographed, then I can become invisible, and that's when I get the kind of stuff that I really like, and that's just suited me really well, and so I've stuck with it, and it's.
And I think what we'll do is after we do go to screen share, because whilst we're talking, your website is going through the galleries, and there's some great images here which we've got to show our guests, our viewers. Sorry, but I want to come to the gear afterwards, because I think it's important that we talk about that. As the type of gear that I think I know what you're using now, the Fuji's, lends itself to the type of style of this documentary style. So we'll talk about the gear after we've done the screen share, Bradley. I'm just going to go to screen share now, and hopefully you'll be able to.
Oh, I can see it. Yes,
it's coming up on the screen. I'm now behind. Let me just make sure one thing present to everyone. So you should be now seeing your screen, and I'm held that screen. So
I do.
If I go up here, as I mentioned before the show, which would be, say, the weddings 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Would you prefer to talk about?
Oh, I would say, just based on the fact that it's human nature for people to click weddings 1, we might want to just talk about that.
Go to weddings 1 then. Now these actually scroll through, don't they?
They don't. They'll scroll through the
arrow.
There's one image, yeah. So, and then to enlarge them full screen, you just click in the right corner. You'll see a plus. Got it. And then everything will go full screen.
And can I scroll on from that particular image in full screen?
Correct. Yes.
I can. Okay, let's go full. Oh, I got it. Yeah, brilliant. That's superb. Now, it's interesting here. I didn't think for 1 minute that you are prepared to travel away. And I'm assuming I'm correct here, for clients to take photographs overseas.
Yes, in fact, that's something that I very blissfully stumbled into accidentally. This particular shot was in India in 2005, and that's film. Mm-hmm. That is drugstore grade Fuji Superia 400, which is still one of my favorite films. Mm-hmm. And that's, I did my first travel wedding in 2001 in the southern coast of Mexico, and that just kind of snowballed from there.
Great shot. Whereabouts in India was this taken?
This was in Rajasthan, which is almost exactly in the middle, and that was just a few months after those horrific tsunamis.
Yes, yeah.
It didn't affect that part of the country.
No, of course not. No, I love the car in the center here. Beautiful.
Well, yeah, that's a custom in all Indian weddings, and the original custom was that it was the groom would show up on a white horse with his family, arrive at the bride's family, and prove his worthiness. Now, some people still do horses, but most people use white cars.
I think I've got to mention here, I was very fortunate to go on business to Delhi one year, and stayed in the Taj Palace Hotel in New Delhi. And we were just walking around the hotel, and we were invited to go down into the main conference hall next to where the exhibition was, which I was where I was doing some work. And there was a wedding being prepared. And it's one of these events where they were very, very rich family, I would hasten to add. And for those that don't know, an Indian wedding goes on for a number of days, sometimes weeks, where they have all these meetings and bring in the families together. Now, this particular event, I just couldn't believe the decoration, the food that was available, the amount of people that were there, and the way everyone was dressed so beautifully. You know, the lady that was going to get married, she was just outstanding with her outfits, and it's absolutely amazing. And they really do go to town for a wedding. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, and you know they're beautiful, and some of the customs are wonderful, and typically the way they play out, at least the weddings I've done here and this one in India, was they're usually 2 or 3 day events,
right?
And because they're kind of abbreviated, but sometimes the ceremony itself is several hours. And so the challenge for me as someone who, you know, I live and and breathe and think in black and white, but there are times where color is the only choice.
You just got to have it. You're right. Yeah.
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 I mean, it's
Did if you don't mind me asking, did you have any problems being involved in this type of wedding? With regards to probably were there other photographers there? Basically, there were native photographers. Did you have any problems on that front?
No, I didn't. I knew, the bride and I had not met at that point, but it was clear that I was the primary and only photographer. And so there were other people shooting, but no one got in my way. And of course, this was 10 years ago. Things are very different now with the ubiquity of cell phones and, handheld cameras.
Exactly. It's, I love this shot. I think it's absolutely great. Where again, beautiful eye contact with, I'm assuming that's the bride.
Yes.
Would that be the groom in front looking back?
So, thank you. So what's funny is that was actually a wedding I just did a blog post about yesterday to give you an idea of how far behind I am. But this was a wedding in September, and the groom was from Brazil and the bride was from Colorado, and they ended up getting married in rural Minnesota, I think it's about an hour away from Minneapolis, at this farm. And so this was moments before the bride and groom saw each other for the first time. And so what's funny is I was kind of
superb
in the process of setting them in a situation that I thought was going to be great. And then I saw the light hit her and she looked at me, and the sun was shining and the wind was blowing and everything fell into place. And I just moved in with my lens, and I knew at that moment that it was going to be great. And so that night when I was copying, backing up everything, that was the first thing I looked for, and it was even better than I remembered. So that's one of the things where I still had that sort of excitement like you have with film, where you don't know exactly what it's going to look like, and you're looking at that dead raw file, but you're visualizing it how you want it to be.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, on this particular image, what was the gear you had on this particular image?
This is the X Pro 1 and the 56mm at f1.2.
Wow.
And macro mode, of course, so I could get in.
Yeah. Superb. It's probably one of my favorite shots on your portfolio, actually. This one again. And one of the things you mentioned earlier on, I'm not too sure it was the beginning of the show before we started, but the bokeh of what we get from the type of gear that you're using here. This is am I correct? This is a digital image, but it gives a film-like quality.
This particular image is actually film, and that was the Nikon 85 1.4.
Okay.
With a Nikon F5.
Wow.
Which is funny because now, the idea of having 5 focus points is hard for people to imagine.
Yeah.
Just before that, the F4 had 1.
Yes. Yeah. How times have changed. That's amazing, isn't it?
Shooting.
Again, this is an image which really a lot of people would not expect to see in a wedding portfolio. But again, it's showing the joy of a wedding. A group of people that are enjoying themselves. You can see they're all got their hands up, and some are taking some photographs in the bottom left-hand corner with their iPhone by the looks of things, and all sorts going on. But what you've done here is you've just gone for that huge negative space, which is really quite a dynamic image, unusual to be in a wedding portfolio.
Thank you. Yeah, this was one of the ones I was also very excited about and very proud of. This was a wedding in Sonoma County, California, which is a wine, hotspot for wine.
Yeah.
It was just moments before I had taken a shot of, this is the entire wedding at one long table, which is a beautiful, beautiful setup. So they're cheering during the toasts, and right behind them is the winery. So they're sort of up on this bluff, and the sun was setting, and I was walking away, and I saw this beautiful silhouette. And I took a few shots. I only took 3, but this was the only one I took. Well, I took 2 with a 14, the X Pro 1 and the 14mm. And I was kind of framing it, and I just tipped it up, and all of a sudden it popped. That was exactly what I wanted. And I got good timing with the guests' hands in the air, and it just feels very celebratory to me, and it reminds me exactly of what it felt like to be there, and that's exactly what I want to convey with every wedding.
Yeah, it's lovely that all the silhouettes of those people, they're all looking to my left, obviously to their right of obviously the toast which is going on. It's a great angle, and this one makes me laugh. They look like a couple of gangsters, these two, don't they? It's
yeah, that's a groom and his little brother, and it's funny that they look extremely young, maybe even too young to be smoking. But that was Leica M7 and the 90 millimeter Summicron, which was one of my favorite lenses of all time.
Beautiful bokeh over here. It's lovely, isn't it? Beautiful.
Yeah, there is very little like that.
This one you just got to laugh at. It's typical at a wedding where you've got some kid that is just doing his own thing. He just doesn't care. He's just doing his own thing. Has he spotted you? Has he reacted to you?
I don't know if he even was aware of me. What was funny is this was in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And we were just walking to this monument, and obviously the bride in the foreground. And then I always have 3 cameras on my body, and I saw this kid just do that, and I reacted. And luckily, part of why I work the way I work is I keep my left shoulder is always wide angle. I keep a normal lens around my neck, and then I usually a short telephoto on my right shoulder. And so I knew based on the distance that I'd reach for my right shoulder, and that worked perfectly.
I was going to ask you in actual fact, how many cameras do you have at your ready? And so you have 3.
I bring 4, and I'm wearing 3, and that's, again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that's one of the reasons why mirrorless is such a great option for me.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Come home just brutally tired.
Yeah, I can imagine you if you were in the league of the D800s or that sort of camera, big camera bodies. I bet you're exhausted by the time you got home if you had 3 around your neck.
Yes.
A little bit different this one. Boom, color, straight, bang in your face, this one.
But yeah, for me, part of the way that I see the world, and also the way I pace my portfolio, is the belief that color has significantly greater impact when it's used sparingly, and when it is something where it really enhances the mood. Now, this particular shot it's a museum of glass that's designed around this well-known glass blower by the name of Dale Chihuly. It's in the base of the Space Needle, so it's covered in glass, and so you have this gorgeous light all day for the reception venue. And then, in the event of less than ideal weather, the guests are covered, and it's a really amazing space. And so this is the X100S. Just pointed up, that 35 millimeter perspective ended up being perfect.
Yeah. And then again, concentrating the focus on the glasses and using the great silhouette and couple blurred out in the background. Right.
Yeah. So again, one of the things that I like to look for with any wedding is, all these shots, might be the typical shots at a wedding are not new to me after 600 weddings, but they are to the couple.
Yeah.
But even still, I'm looking for things that I haven't done before. So when during the toasts, the couple was looking at the person speaking, and I got down low because I'm tall, to kind of get out of the sight line and also to change my perspective. And I saw this light coming off the lake, hitting the glasses perfectly and creating this silhouette. And so rather than expose for the couple, I thought using them to kind of frame the glasses and create that sort of abstraction out of something very simple.
Yeah.
It worked really well. And that's, again, no matter what lens I'm using, I like things to be simple and clean. And I think that's part of why that image is successful.
Yeah. Just one more on this this group, then we'll switch over, because I'd like to just briefly go through your landscape work as well.
Right.
This is a nice touching moment which you've caught here.
Thank you. Yeah, this is just something that happens at most weddings in the U.S. is like bride and groom will see each other first. Has a number of advantages. One, it's more efficient with the time, and then their hair and makeup look great rather than, you know, trying to photograph them after they've been crying or, you know, usually after a wedding, everyone wants to talk to the couple too. So it becomes very difficult to get that sort of separation.
Yeah.
This is just, you know, bride and groom seeing each other for the first time, and I'm using a 90mm lens here, and just back at a probably 10 or 12 feet, and so I don't get into their personal space, but letting the couple just kind of live their life and then making it look the way I want to look, and that's the way that I shoot.
Yeah, it's lovely, lovely shot. Let's come out of that. They're beautiful, beautiful work there, Bradley. I'm not going to go to landscape color. I want to go to landscape black and white.
Thank you.
Because I had a brief look at this earlier on, and this is again. Let's just go through these relatively quickly. I love the snow effect on the trees here, and this is you look at this photograph and you feel cold.
Yes,
not cold towards the photograph. Don't get me wrong, but it says to me it's cold out there. Beautifully cold.
Understood. Yeah. So what's funny is everything in my landscape portfolio, I think without exception, was taken on the X100S. All of them within the last 2 years. So I tend to get excited about what I'm doing now and kind of toss aside older images. Although in my wedding portfolio, I do have some of my favorite images from the years, but I tend to replace everything with newer images because that's what I'm the most excited about. This was one of those freak snowstorms in Minneapolis. I think it was April, you know, it wasn't.
Yeah, not the depths of winter then.
Yeah, so it wasn't. That's the thing that's funny about snow is typically when you get snow, that's indicative that it's not, you know, the coldest part of the season, because snow typically happens near the freezing point. But that was what also allows it to gather on those branches. And so part of, you know, what we're experiencing now is the leaves falling. And then once those leaves are bare, you have all those, you know, countless surfaces for the snow to get on. And so I was just driving around, and Minneapolis has an amazing park system. So just looked over and I just saw this maze, and kind of to anchor the composition with that main thick tree in the front. It almost looked like fingers, like a hand to me.
Yeah, they do, don't they? Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's nice about the trees in the winter because they're just the tree is just crying out for something to dress it. It's waiting for spring for basically, but when the snow falls onto it, of course, it becomes dressed, doesn't it? You got it's beautiful, black and white, bang. It's really dynamic.
Thank you. Well, it's funny, if you were to see that in color, it would look pretty much the same.
It probably would do. Yeah, it probably would do in that case. Yeah, beautiful gray sky. Yeah, that's right. Probably with a little bit of tinge of blue in it. This is a great landscape shot. Very, very lovely bright ravine going down through here, and the skies here. Again with the X100S, yeah?
Correct. And this is, in fact, it's the X100S with the TCL photo adapter. So I actually took that one while I was shooting a wedding, and this was on Crystal Mountain. So it's about 7,000 feet up, and the haze in the background is the Washington State was having an unusually high number of wildfires that I guess this was a couple months ago. And that's what's creating that sort of streaked light. So it was kind of everything falling into place
Lovely.
In terms of the shot. And just there's really it's a very unique feeling being up there because of that perspective. So what you're looking at here is the base of a mountain that's the second highest mountain in the US. So it's almost 15,000 feet. So it's a very unique perspective, and that's in Washington State.
Yeah. Interesting perspective here, looking out to, of a Is this a bus window or a train window?
This is actually a window from the ferry. So
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
this was I did a wedding in, well, I've done several weddings at this location, and it's one of my favorites. It's a place called Orcas Island in Washington, and it's very near the Canadian border. And the only way to and from it is through about a 45-minute ferry ride from the main part of the state. And it's beautiful and very tranquil. And there's really nowhere that I've been that's like it. And so I kind of wanted to create that sort of happy, kind of secluded feeling in the morning. And that's, the light was very conducive to that.
Yeah. Nice one. Really like that. Let's go on one more test, and this one we'll finish on actually, Bradley, looking over the lake. What city is that on the far side there?
This is Seattle. So this is the view of the main part of the city from a sort of peninsula on the western side, and so that's actually a saltwater inlet from the Pacific called Puget Sound. So that's, as you can expect, as you're used to in London, it's typically there can be gray and fog there, and so that works well for photographs, of course.
That's very true. I'm going to come out of screen share now. Thank you very much indeed for talking through your photographs there. That was brilliant. We don't get that much fog in London anymore. We still get the rain, but we don't get that much fog anymore. Let's talk about gear, because the last time we spoke on one of my shows was when we talked to the three of you, Patrice, Ben, and yourself, about the X100C Collective. And it's unique in the sense that you all shoot using the X100 series of camera. I think the majority of you now either using the S or maybe the T. I know Ben's using the T. Why did you switch to Fuji?
Well, it was like a lot of great things in my life. It was relatively random. I was in the process of, I was using kind of a mix of Leica and film cameras and Nikon DSLRs, and I was in the process of looking at a D700, and I think I was looking at a used D700, and right around that time was when, this was mid 2012, that was when the X Pro was announced, and without seeing it in person or touching it or really knowing very much about it at all, I bought it blindly because I was attracted to the manual features on it and the way it looked. And this was firmware 1.0, and so I got it. I was very, very excited about it, just determined to use it immediately for work. So I had about, I think, a month between getting it and my next wedding, because I got it early in the very quiet part of the season, luckily.
Yeah.
Just practiced with it and really bonded with it almost immediately, because like the rangefinders and the earlier Nikon system, I'm very drawn to physical controls, physical aperture ring, shutter speed dial, aperture compensation or exposure compensation, and the size and weight of the camera, and just loving the results that I was getting. And so while a lot of people that I remember around that time were focused only on issues they were having with focus speed, to me, I was focusing on all of the benefits, like the lightweight, the fact that it had 49 focus points that covered the entire frame, the fact that for me, any kind of autofocus was great because I was so used to manual focus. And so for the price of a used D700, I felt like I got a much better camera.
Yeah. I tell you, it's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because I was a Nikon user, quite extensive kit that I had, and it was too much for me to carry around, basically. And I was torn between, I couldn't afford the X Pro. I was torn between either getting the X100, which was just coming to its end, the S was just about to be released, or the XE. And one of the things which I'd read about the XE was the fact that it was slow on focus. And when I went into the shop to actually try it out before I bought the thing, I was I said to the guy, I said, well, what is slow about this camera? You know, it focuses as quickly as I would expect. And I think you do get some people that are obviously just looking to critique for critique reasons, and for that purpose, I thought no, that they were wrong. I've never had a focusing issue with any of the Fujis, quite honest with you.
No, and I do think that's more indicative of the age and experience of the person doing the critiquing, because again, like I would show that to other photographers and they said, I don't understand, what's the focus problem? Like, you know, I think people having come from the experience of shooting older gear and focusing manually look at things very differently than people coming from exclusively, you know, an introduction to photography from a DSLR where everything is seemingly instantaneous.
Yeah.
Now, the side benefit to that was that slowing, I think a lot of people have the mindset that going as fast as you can is the way to approach photography, which is kind of the opposite of the way that I see things. In fact, you know, a lot of people have given the advice, one of the best things you can do for your photography is turning your autofocus off and just focusing manually.
Very true.
So you know, it sounds apologetic, but you know, the reality of having that gear slow you down did alter my photography back in a very positive way to the way that I had worked with film cameras. And I think that what I had lost a little bit with the DSLR world was focusing on that sort of shooting too much. And that's just, you know, when you have slow autofocus is similar to having 36 frames in a roll of film, you look at the world very differently. And I think that's very positive.
Yeah, I think another point which I've come to realize as well, a lot of street photographers, which I walk about the cities with these days, are effectively zone focusing, setting their cameras to 5.6 or f8, boom, that's it, and away they go. They don't worry about focusing the camera. They just want to take the photograph and take that opportunity as soon as they see the image. So this is a totally different way of using cameras. Yeah, I can understand the guys that are into sports photography which need that sharp, quick focus. But even then, back in the day, everyone was using zone focusing, weren't they? With their
sports photography isn't new. They were
exactly right.
There were sports. So I think what people were doing was kind of the way that I would shoot weddings when I was shooting manually is, you know, where someone's about to be, you choose an appropriate aperture, you focus on that point and wait for them to be at that point. And I would even do that occasionally when I was shooting. I don't want to go too much into it, but I bought that original 18, 35 and 60. And if you've used the 60, you know, it's a wonderful lens, but it is just incredibly slow to focus. Like there was a Canon 85 1.2 that was similar to that, and so it would sort of shift from one side to the other, and when it would pop on, you know, you would send out a quiet cheer and be very grateful that it was really a great lens. Just it was a little too slow. So when the 56 came out, I was very excited.
What's the gear that you take to the to an event, a wedding event, Bradley?
What I do now is the 56 again is my primary lens, in conjunction with the 23 on the X100S. So I have two X Pro 1 bodies that I usually around my neck. I have two X Pro 1 bodies on the X100S, and I'm using them in conjunction with the 14. The 23, the 56, and occasionally we'll use the 90. And I did replace my 35 1.4 with the TCL on the X100S, but I also ordered the 35 f2 because I'm very, very excited about that lens.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about it. I've only read a couple of reports. Ben, again, and I were talking about it at the weekend, and he was thinking about ditching his 35 1.4 for the f2. I like the 35 1.4 for the time being, and it's a very reasonably priced. I was really surprised, about £300 in.
Oh yeah, it's almost 60% less than the 1.4.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
faster focus. It's internal focusing, weather resistant, and the backgrounds are smoother.
Yeah, it looks a very
not as shallow, but
it looks an interesting lens, definitely. So no zoom lenses in your pack at all. It's they're all primes.
No, and that's the way that I'm used to working. Even when I was using DSLRs, like I tried the, the 24 to 70 equivalent, and it just didn't suit me. I always used it at 24 or 70, and I thought,
what's the point? Yeah.
Yeah. And so what works better for me is getting to know a focal length really well. And then, for example, like the 23 is the equivalent of a 35, or a 35 is like a 50. You know what you're going to get before you put it to your eye. And I think knowing that is much more useful than racking back and forth on a zoom.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Okay,
so rather than 70 to 200, I just use the 90, and it's a great lens, but it's a lens that I rarely use.
Yeah, because there's a lot of guys I'm talking about the 4150, and I know there's one coming out, and they keep on putting it back. Is it the 100 to 400? And a couple of people are sort of saying that's the next lens I want to get, but I certainly wouldn't be looking at that sort of lens or camera. I guess I got 2 primes and the 1855, which suits me down to the ground for the type of work that I do.
Likewise.
Come to that time of the show. This is where my guests normally get a little bit sort of twitchy. They sort of, I don't know what to say. Who would be your inspiration in photography, Bradley?
I would say the person that was an original inspiration and has kind of remained so is Ralph Gibson, who is a photographer. He's lived in New York for most of his life, but he's a photographer originally from Los Angeles. His father assisted Alfred Hitchcock. Right. I bought a book of his in the early 80s at an art museum, and just, it's only slightly hyperbolic to say that it changed my world, because it was almost everything is 50 millimeter lens. It was all, mostly like a 50 Summicron dual range, very close focus, very high contrast, very compositionally driven. And that's really what excited me about the potential that photography had. And so from there, I moved on to other stuff like Henri Cartier-Bresson and things like that you typically study in photography class. But it's the more abstract stuff that has always interested me. And I think Cartier-Bresson's composition was extremely influential. But it was Gibson's approach to the subject, to minimalism, to contrast, that really excited me about the medium. And so for me now, I guess my continuing influence is my family, and movies. I really love cinematography, and my I go into this a little bit on my bio on my website, but my favorite films tend to be surreal movies where the emphasis is on the cinematography, and there's 4 or 5 from the same French director that I really love, and that I see, that's where I get a lot of inspiration from composition, because that's a very different part of the brain than still photography.
It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because it sounds to me as though you're looking at other people's work to get your inspiration, which is in my opinion is the best way to do it. But from watching films and from reading books, they're obviously giving you ideas as regards to what work you want to produce for your portfolio.
Yes, and so what's funny is that none of those sources are other weddings, and so I try to deliberately keep myself not ignorant to what's going on, but I like to you can't unsee things. So when I'm seeing a movie or I'm looking at something in a book, whether or not you want it to, those things are getting into your head, and that has an inescapable view of the way you see the world. And so I think if I were to focus too much on looking at other people's weddings, I think that might, I don't want it to change the way that I see things.
No, I think I understand what you're saying there, because I think that if you do start looking at similar type of genre in terms of wedding photography, then your work would be affected. Now, the point I'm making is along the lines that you're looking at a work which is outside of your work genre, which is giving you an influence, we'll say, when you actually go to work to do your wedding photography. Who would be your favorite photographer then? Do you have one that is a new one, or someone that's always been your favorite photographer?
Well, I don't follow Gibson quite as much as I used to, but I still love his work. I love the work of all of the Magnum photographers.
Yeah.
I have several of their books. I love, there's a Dutch photographer whose name is Anton Corbijn.
Yes.
He's fairly well known for, he was shooting, music and promotional photography for bands in the late 70s, like Joy Division and New Order and Echo and the Bunnymen and U2 and stuff like that. I think he does a lot of work. He's one of those people that's still very dedicated to film, and he does a lot of work with Hasselblad square format, which is something that I have a very strong fondness for. And I think I like that his perspective is also, he shoots in a very specific style with push triax and a yellow filter and lithographic printing. And so it's, it's very easy to imitate everything these days, but I love that he has stayed with that, with the thing that kind of got him where he was. And I think, like Ralph Gibson, I thought that I was never going to shoot digital because I was so attached to film. And just the things that you learn from post-production and what can be done with a raw file are, at first very intimidating and scary, but it ends up being very liberating and positive in what you can do. And I think that's getting over that initial fear, I think, is what kind of led me to believe the format is so secondary to the end result. So again, when someone's looking at my portfolio, they don't ever know if it's film or digital. All they care about is what they feel from the photograph. And I think that's the important thing in any medium. It doesn't matter what the tool is as much as if it helps you get where you want to go.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I remember hearing Jay Maisel say something very similar in terms of he thought he would never switch from film. Film was his way to go. That's why he would go out on the New York streets and do his street photography, his abstract photography, all sorts of stuff, but then pointed in the direction of, why don't you try a digital camera? And he was hooked. He switched immediately, and and as you say, quite rightly, you couldn't tell the difference between whether it was a film shot or whether it was a digital image. And that, I suppose, is what's ingrained in a photographer when they start their career. If they've come through the film lines, then they start using the digital. There's no separation in their work. You can't say, yeah, no, that's definitely digital now. I can see the difference in the work.
Well, again, and even for myself, it wasn't always that way. Like, I used one of the original, in fact, Canon 1D, which was a terrible, it was great at the time, but a terrible, in reality, and very different from film. And so one of the reasons that I had such an aversion to digital was when I started using it, I could not get it to match my film images at all. And so I would shoot a wedding and it might be half digital and half film, and I would only like the film images. And that, that's why I had that mindset. And so that didn't really change until I started really using the Fuji line.
Yeah, I was going to just say quickly before we wrap up, so to speak, that I remember you saying to me that one of the attractions of using the Fuji cameras, the X Pro 1 in particular, it gave you that film-like quality which you had missed from your film days.
Right, and the film-like way of working, which was sort of hand in hand.
Yeah. Bradley, thank you so much for joining me. It's really interesting to talk to you. Fantastic portfolio. What I'm going to do, I wrote my blog over the weekend, and I'll put all your links on there, all your blog links and your Twitter, Facebook links and everything of that nature. Thank you so much for joining me today. All I can say is, well, I know we're approaching November. Have a good Christmas, nice break, and let's hope you can get your diary full for next year with your wedding business.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Thanks again. And by the way, folks, before you go out this weekend, yes, it's Friday. I don't usually do a show on Friday, but if you're going out shooting this weekend, yep, that's right. Do what I say. Leave your camera bag at home. All the best to you. Bye for now.